Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Kent City Council Special Meeting Workshop this evening. Today is Tuesday, September 29th. This is a remote meeting due to the COVID-19 health safety requirements put in order by the governor. If you are joining us this evening, we are on Kent TV 21, the City of Kent Facebook, and the City of Kent YouTube TV 21 channel. So welcome to anyone that is joining us. We just have a few items on the agenda, but before we get started, I just want to take a moment to recognize our Public Works Director, Tim Laporte. Many of you have heard Tim's last day is actually tomorrow. He is retiring. He has spent at least 31 years here at the City of Kent in our Public Works Department, and I know I'm going to miss him. I'm sure many of the council members are going to miss him as well. He has spent so much time with many of us, taking us around the city to see what different projects are happening, and he has really been someone who the city has been able to count on in that department. And I am very grateful for the service he has provided. And I just want to say thank you, Tim, and best wishes in your retirement. Moving on in the agenda, the first item that we have is the 2021-2022 biennial budget. And earlier this evening, we did see the mayor's budget presentation, and I just want to thank her for that. It was a wonderful presentation. It gave us a look at what is coming up in this budget process, and I want to thank you again for being open with us and including the council in conversations this past year as we work through this process. I would like to introduce Paula Painter to get us started on the presentation this evening. Welcome, Paula.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me. We just had a little change in our process here. Michelle's actually going to do the driving of the PowerPoint presentation. I had an issue with my computer, so thank you, Michelle, for stepping up. I want to start off by saying that the mayor did a fantastic job of really providing you with a great overview of what this 21-22 mayor's proposed budget is looking like. So thank you so much for doing that, Mayor, and that was really great. So there's a lot of this information that I'm going to be sharing with you that was mentioned during that special council meeting that was held at 5 o'clock today. But we're going to go ahead and continue on with that. Next slide, please, Michelle. So what I'm going to do is spend a little bit of time going over just kind of a high level review of the citywide budget for the 21-22 biennial budget. Then we're going to move into talking about the general fund, both the revenue and expenditure side of the house. And then really our next steps. We'll talk about the remaining steps in our budget process, and then just kind of what you can be expecting as we continue to move forward. Next slide, please. So overall, the 21-22 biennial budget has over a $680 million budget, in which $217 million is related to general fund, at least from the expenditure side of the house. We'll get into the revenue side of the house. We'll get into the expenditures as we move this forward. When you look at this, we have the various enterprise funds, and that would be encompassing your water, sewer, drainage, golf type funds that are making up the majority of this budget, the $680 million budget, and general fund at the $218 million revenue budget. Next slide, please. On the expenditure side of the house, the expenditure budget is for the general fund $217.5 million. And as you can see, this is broken out by department here. We will get into, particularly when we're talking about the general fund, what's really making up some of those numbers that are in that budget. Total expenditure budget, which really drives the legal budget, that is what we are bound by, is the $687.8 million expenditure budget. Next slide, please. Also included in the budget are some positions. So what you're going to find is, and I'll explain it this here in just a moment. We started with the 2020 adopted budget. And as an organization, you know, we did go through those that extensive budget reduction exercise due to the impacts of COVID. And so what you're seeing in the 2020 column change there are the overall impacts to positions in there in that budget. When you go into 21 requests, there were 5 positions that were requested. 1 position is for the general fund, and that the position that was funded within the general fund, we'll get into a little bit more, but that's that incredibly important position of an equity manager to be able to address our needs of racial and social justice within our organization. I'm just going to stop and speak a little bit about that. There is a 1 FTE that actually will increase in the general fund, but the reason why you're seeing only 0.49 is because as part of our COVID reductions, there were some shifts in how our employees were budgeted, and we had some employees who were budgeted in the general fund, and they were going to be spending more of their time on a project. And so as we went into 21, that additional time was going to be shifted to the streets capital projects funds out of the general fund. This is something that was part of the presentation that came forth related to the COVID reductions based on how we have to show it for actual changes for the year. You're seeing this this strange little split, but ultimately it is only 1 FTE in that general fund. The mayor did talk about the street operating fund, where we had contracts that were in place for handling of the maintenance of some of our planter strips. And instead of continuing on with those contracts at the end of 2022, that we would then move to actually hiring additional positions to do that work, creating living wage positions within the organization and filling a need for jobs as well in there instead of handling that through contract work. The IT, you'll see there's a request for a 2 FTE. Those are temporary term, limited term positions. Those were actually, creates a net zero budget, which means the IT department has said, I will move away from using some professional services in order to have these temporary term positions on there. And you'll see one of them does go away in 2022. So it's really a short-term position. Can we go ahead and move on to the next slide, please? So over the years, you'll see how the change in positions and FTEs compared to our 1,000 population. The big dip there, which probably should have been left off the screen, really is showing when the fire department left. And at that time, that did shrink the number of FTEs per 1,000. But over time, you can see that we have been fairly consistent, if not slightly going down for where we have been in the past. Next slide, please. So on to kind of the meat of our discussion here, and that's talking about our revenues. So if you look at the 2020 adjusted budget, currently we have nearly $109.5 million in revenue projected for the general fund. These revenues, we're going to get into kind of the discussion of what made up these changes in these balances, but just kind of a high level, you're going to see that we're dropping by by about less than $3 million as we are looking at the annexation funding going away. So currently we're receiving annexation funding. So that will account for part of the reduction that you're seeing in that revenue stream there, which is a big factor in some of that. We will dive deeper into what's making up these revenues and what kind of assumptions are rolling into that as we move forward into the next budget. In 2021, just conceptually, just so you know, that we did look at that fairly conservatively in that we still have some impacts of COVID-19 and not really knowing. There's a lot of uncertainty at this point as to what the revenues are going to look like as we move forward. So you will see not quite the amount of increase in 2021. But by 2022, there is the assumption that we'll continue to see more of our standard growth in our revenues and expenditures, and also some recovery from where we're at with some of these items. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at the general fund, this is really what's making up our general fund. Property taxes at 29%, sales taxes at 18%, B&O taxes make up 17%, and utility taxes. So you're going to find 80% of our budget really is, our general fund budget really is supported by taxes. And then the other 20%, well, really 19% are made up of these other revenues, such as licenses and permits, charges for services, fines and forfeitures. And then we have some other miscellaneous revenues in there, as well as some governmental revenues. Next slide, please. So with our property taxes, you saw there was a little bit of a bump in our property taxes. Michelle, can you go back two slides for a moment? So as you see, we were at 30.4 million for 2020, going up to 30.7 million for 2021. You can go ahead and go back, Michelle. Part of that was truing up our budget to our levy amount. It was under budgeted for 2020. So really that's kind of putting it back in line where it needs to be. In addition to that truing up, we can always count on 1% growth in our property tax as well as new construction. So that also is factored in. When you're looking at this chart, one of the things I want to do is to be able to explain to you some of what you're seeing. First off, when you're seeing these blue highlighted lines, these are baseline adjustments that are truing things up. The 772,000, we don't repeat it in 2 years because if you look at the second column there is comparing 2021 to 2022. We're not going to increase by 700,000, but that 700,000 does roll forward into that following year. So that I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that as we're looking at this chart. So that's really what the variance in our property tax is looking like. When we start looking at our sales tax revenues, again, we're losing $2.2 million in annexation. And with the annexation funding, we were required to do accounting of all revenues that would be associated with annexation, which meant that there were other revenues that would typically belong in other funds, but we had to incorporate that into our annexation reporting within the general fund. So a portion of that was criminal justice sales tax. So that criminal justice sales tax will no longer be reported in the general fund, but instead it's going to be going to criminal justice fund. It has always been used for its proper purpose. It was just a reporting mechanism. We are not losing that funding. It's just a shift from general fund to criminal justice. In addition, there were some baseline and inflation adjustments and volume adjustments that were factored into our sales tax figure. When it comes to utility taxes within our general fund, we will see an increase of $1.6 million in the general fund. And again, that's not an increase in our overall tax collection related to utility tax, but instead that's a shift from our capital resource fund to the general fund. 2% utility tax was being recorded into the capital resource fund to cover the internal debt. That internal debt is now paid off, and according to the ordinance, that 2% allocation would sunset when the debt was paid off. So that will now come back to the general fund. But there's another change in accounting principle we're going to talk about, our accounting practice we're going to talk about, and that is there is a 4% utility tax that we have historically receded into the general fund and did a transfer out to the capital resource fund. And truly, it didn't make sense to manage it that way. Those were extra transfers that needed to happen. So what we've done is shifted, since the capital resource fund does receive that 4% utility tax, to just record it there initially instead of doing those additional transfers. In addition, similar to the criminal justice sales tax, the cable utility tax belongs to the IT fund. It had to be recorded for annexation purposes within the general fund. Now that annexation funding is gone, we're able to now shift that funding back to the IT department. In addition, there were other baseline adjustments for about just over $100,000. Michelle, can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. B&O tax, the B&O tax, we do have B&O tax, that new outdoor square footage that was approved by council on September 15th. Thank you so much. That we're estimating will bring in approximately $2.1 million in revenue to the city. In 2022, our regular square footage ordinance called for an increase. As you may recall, a couple of years ago that B&O tax rates were looked at, and there were staggered rate increases that went out multiple years, and 2022 was another one of those years that we would be seeing that increase. For other taxes, there were some baseline adjustments, really truing up what those revenues should look like. Some of that being related to, for other taxes, we're talking about gambling taxes, we're talking about admissions taxes. We do know with COVID, both of those are down since large gatherings really aren't happening quite yet. We don't know really at this point when things will be opening up to larger, but there is very conservative approach in the budget for 21 and 22 related to those. With licenses and permits, we do have a reduction of $703,000. These are revenue reductions that were based on some of what we're seeing in our activity related to business licenses and permits, primarily as a result of the COVID reductions. This is an area, though, that this revenue stream could be coming back sooner. And if that's the case, we can reevaluate this and look at potentially adjusting that revenue. But just taking a conservative approach moving into 21, there are some revenue reductions related to that. In addition, we in 2022, we're anticipating restoring some of those reductions as part of that budget. And then finally, our intergovernmental revenue. Our motor vehicle excise tax distribution that we receive, again, that was funding that was in the general fund, but we'll be shifting back to its appropriate fund. So that will go to the criminal justice fund. The fuel tax, same situation there, and that $298,000 will be going back to the street fund. And then finally, there are some other baseline adjustments that fall into there, more truing up our intergovernmental revenues to match that of what we're expecting to receive during the 21-22 budget. Next slide, please. And then continuing on, we're just about done with the revenue side of the house. What you're going to find for charges and services, there is a reduction of revenue that we're expecting related to COVID. We've seen substantial reductions during 2020 in this area related to COVID. Again, we still don't know when things will get back to normal. We've tried to be conservative in our approach. We don't want to go in assuming that everything is going to be back to where it was prior to our budget reduction exercise. So this is just taking a conservative approach on that revenue, knowing we can look at it again if things begin to change and make adjustments. We are assuming as we roll into 21-22 that we're going to have things are going to be coming back to normal. So we do have growth in that area related to the restoration of some of those revenues. Fines and forfeitures, we are having fines and forfeitures coming in slightly below budget in 2020. But we're still seeing those look pretty good. We are truing these fines and forfeitures up. We've been conservative in some of our areas of budget in these with regards to this. So that's what you're seeing here for slight increases in those revenue budgets. Also, overall interest income, we have drastically under budgeted interest income for 2020 or for 2020, and really we just have been just naturally. So we are increasing that just a bit as we go into 21-22. However, with 21, we are anticipating that we're going to spend down some of our fund balance. So we still are thinking that in 22, although our budgets are going to be looking healthy and good, at least we'd like to believe they're going to be looking very good and getting us back to normal, I think we would have tapped into some of our fund balance at that point. And so we've adjusted for some decrease in interest income due to that. And then you'll see that there are some baseline adjustments, again, just truing some things up. And then in our transfers in, so these are monies that come in from other funds into the general fund. There were some one-time budgets in 2020 that were transfers into the general fund, and that will not continue on. So you're going to see a reduction in that related to that. And then finally, there's some baseline adjustments based on transfer from other funds who contribute to the general fund, whether that is for the youth teen fund and its collection of utility tax and so forth. So this is just a small variation of transfers in that would make up those numbers. I know I've been talking an awful lot. I don't know if you guys prefer that I just keep going or if people want to stop. I think I'm at the last slide for revenue. Michelle, is that true? If I'm at the last revenue slide, I'd be happy to take questions at this point in time.
Paula, let's take a second and just see before we move out of the revenue section. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Paula? Councilmember Boyce.
I don't currently have any question. I was gonna just probably wait and look at this data later and then have questions. So I don't have any question at this time.
Perfect. So Paula, just one quick thing. If I'm looking at this and I'm looking at the bottom where it says total revenues and I'm looking at the changes, so probably just under half of that is coming from that B&O change that we made or not, if I'm looking at it correctly?
Well, what you're actually seeing a reduction in our revenues of 2.6 million. So it's really a combination of a lot of things. We have increases in that new B&O tax of $2.1 million, but that's being offset by the fact that annexation is going away. So that new B&O tax actually really did soften what would have happened to the revenues in the general fund had had that not been adopted.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Larmer.
Thank you, Council President. Paula, on the transfers in the 1.3 million that will not be continuing, will I find information on that in a subsequent page of the budget book? I'm just curious what the list of those were.
It's not in the budget book, but I would be happy to get that information for you. Most of it's going to be made up of the fact that of the B&O transfer. If you recall, there was a timing issue with B&O, the B&O tax transfer, where we did a big transfer out to our streets fund for the B&O tax that was above and beyond what we had originally budgeted. But because we had to wait until our books were closed for 2019, we had to go back and do that adjustment in 2020 instead of 2019. So that is going to be a big part of it that you're seeing there. The other big part of that would be the transfer out to the Meet Me on Meeker project.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any other questions for Paula before we move on to the next section? All right, Paula, I don't see any hands raised, so go ahead and keep going.
All right, sounds great. Thank you. Next slide, please, Michelle. So we're going to move on to the expenditure budget. Now, what I'm showing you here is under this general fund category, but the reality is that these expenditure assumptions really flow through the entire citywide budget. So there's been adjustments for salary. CPI was 1%. So you'll notice that there's adjustment in 2021 for CPI for most of our employee groups, with exceptions to Teamsters, and theirs are based on their union contract. For 2022, we did stick with the 2.5%. It seems to be a fairly safe marker for creating this budget in this environment. So that's what we have slated for 2022. All of these are things that you've already seen. We really haven't changed our assumptions since the last time I brought this forth, but just wanted to bring it out to you again so you have an understanding of what some of the impacts on the budget numbers that you're seeing are. Healthcare plans, again, at 3.8% and 5%. Increases in our retirement, so those would be our PERS and PSERS. We didn't see any increases in our LEF employees for retirement, and that would be in our police side of the house. Supplies and services, again, they're up by 2%, or where we have contractual agreements that require an increase different than 2%, we did adjust them accordingly. Next slide, please.
Madam President.
Yes, go ahead, Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you. I know, Paula, yes, you're right. We had talked about this before, and I made a comment before, and I make another one again. This health plan is just really just, I mean, those are, you're talking in 2 years, almost a 9% increase, which just seemed extremely high, you know, compared to outside market, you know. I'm just curious what's driving that so much.
So as an organization, we are self-insured. And so as that, our pool is smaller. So in some of these larger organizations, you will find they have thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are part of their program. For an organization like Kent, we are a bit smaller in that when we have some significant or catastrophic events happen, it does impact us more. What we have found as an organization is that it's important to continue to have these smaller incremental increases than to hold the line in some of our increases, because what ends up happening is it's possible to see a 20% increase in 1 year because the volatility of our plan, because our membership is smaller than maybe a multi-million-dollar company who has thousands and thousands and thousands of people on their plans. So this has kind of been the approach. We do engage with an actuary to help us to set these rates. For 2021, the recommended rate is 3.8% increase.
Hmm. Okay. All right.
Yeah. All right, so moving on to expenditures by department. So there's a lot of things that really flow into that beyond what we just shared on the last screen. Um, Flowing into these assumptions, what you're going to find is some changes in how we do some of our accounting, trying to be um, 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 more thoughtful on how we're allocating out some information. So for city council, you will see, so here's each of the departments and their budgets. There's more information that we'll get into, but just kind of a quick highlight. For city council, you do see a reduction in your budget from 2020 going into 2021. The reason for that, if you remember, we had the executive assistant who did retire. And during the time that we did our COVID reductions, that is a portion of that person's salary was paid for out of those cuts. And then you will also see reductions in the IT cost allocation. And so once we applied a different accounting philosophy to our technology allocations that went out to departments. So in the past, what has happened is there has been all the maintenance and service agreements that IT had in which they were paying on were spread amongst all the departments kind of equally based on certain criteria, whether it be how many computers you had or and other criteria. Well, what we found is that there are some systems, many systems that are really utilized by specific departments or funds. So what we began doing is changing how we allocated out those dollars. So what's going to end up happening for departments that are smaller, like administration and finance and HR and law, in their cases, some of their IT allocations could be high and kind of make their budget look like they had a big increase, but really it is actually recording to their departments what it is that they're really spending to maintain that. And that's really the proper way of allocating that out both citywide, and it ensures that other funds and departments are not benefiting at the expense of another. So it's really putting those expenses out there. With administration, their budget is up. That has a lot to do, not fully to do, but a lot to do with the allocation. I think their budget was increased by $300,000 related to the IT cost allocation in there. In addition, the communications division was moved into administration. So you will see that their budget has grown because administration is, communications division is located in there. So there were some positions that their position and their salary was moved with them. So those are not necessarily just large increases within those budgets. It's actually just a shift from one department to another. Economic and community development. That one is because of, again, this way the IT spread happened. The Economic and Community Development Group has their permitting system that they're getting into play right now, which is Amanda. And with that comes the maintenance on that system. Finance department as well. Not much going on there. Contracted services, again, those are just going up by inflation. That's what you're going to find too in finance as well. Human resources, same sort of thing. You're going to see information technology and public works are both going from having a budget in 2020 to not having a budget in 2020. And again, that has to do with the annexation allocation. We had to report in the general fund portions of all of these departments within the general fund to properly capture the costs of maintaining that annexation area. Once that went away, we were able to go back to normal related to our accounting for those departments. Again, you're going to see really fairly status quo budgets moving forward. For the other departments, there is an increase in parks. But again, that has to do with those salaries and benefits and other inflationary things that we talked about on the last screen as well. And same goes with the police department.
Madam President.
Yes, please, Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you, Madam President. Paula, some of these just look awfully high, the 2022 budget, right? You know, I mean, overall is what, almost $4 million. And so when you spread the IT costs, I mean, you take some of the organization is pretty small compared to the other organizations. So can you tell me a little bit more how you break out the IT costs for a smaller organization versus a larger? I mean, finance is a small organization, right? HR
Yeah.
is a small organization. But when I look at the proposed budget, is that all based on IT? I mean, it just doesn't add up.
Not everything on there is based on IT. You are correct. We really did have a status quo budget for the most part. So you're not going to see a lot of growth within the general fund related to what was approved. But to answer your question, what ended up happening with the IT allocation is spreadsheets went out to each department to say, which of these programs do you own and you use? Then what ends up happening is whatever the cost of maintenance is for those programs, that department then had to absorb those costs. When it comes to, and so if you're a small department, it is definitely noticeable within your department on that increase. Some of the larger departments, you're not going to notice as much because it's pretty small, but technology, to be able to maintain the technology we have is pretty expensive. The HR and, for example, HR and finance are paying higher subscription fees to IT due to the Workday subscriptions that are going on.
I mean, I get it. I just think some of your larger organizations should be able to, I mean, sustain. If I got an apartment of 200 people or 150 or 100, whatever, versus an organization that got maybe 30 or 40, I mean, from a philosophical, it just doesn't make sense to me for your smaller organization to pay just as much as your larger. To me, it sounds like you're just kind of peanut butter spreading it across, and to me, it doesn't quite sound right.
In actuality, I can see Councilmember Boyce why you'd think that. It does actually fall into, if you recall, we're going to see an increase in our budgets every 2 years related to this, but truly it is, okay, HR and finance, for example, in order to make sure people are getting paid, you need this Workday subscription to be able to, you need Workday to be able to do your jobs. So starting this year in the 21 and 22 budgets, we're going to start paying for that specifically. Then what ends up happening is the internal services, administration, finance, HR, and law, they allocate out their costs to the other departments, to the other funds that are outside of the general fund. So when we start looking at 23 and 24 budget, what you're going to end up finding is that we will allocate out those costs to the department because we allocate in 2 years of arrears. And so it's a little bit tricky when you're changing your philosophy on how you do the how you do the budgeting by 2 years in order to then, with that lag, it becomes a little bit tricky, and you will see an increase. But when we get to 23, 24, we do get to recoup those costs by the other departments. What this really is doing is ensuring that our utility funds are not receiving costs to their funds that they shouldn't be. So it's really an exercise in making sure that we're properly recording into the funds that utilize the dollars that they should be paying.
I hear what you're saying, and I may just kind of have a separate conversation with you just to kind of get a
Okay.
better understanding, not to bar this conversation down. But I hear what you're saying, but yeah, I'm okay for now.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to have a further conversation.
And
Okay.
Paula, some of that increase also includes salaries and then those benefits, which we saw increase quite a bit
Correct.
in 2022.
Yes, it also includes increases to workers' comp,
And the health benefit.
and health benefits. So all of the dollars that you're seeing are not necessarily just related to the how we're doing the IT allocation. There are so many other factors. Some of that is the shifting of employees from one department to another. That could have a play in that as well.
And I get that part. It just, yeah, I'm okay for now. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I'd be happy to have a conversation offline too.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Okay.
Really quickly, Paula, because I think you sent out the budget information with a link. Remind me, is there a breakout? I believe there's a breakout of each one of these departments as far as their proposed budgets as well. Is that correct?
Yes, there is.
Okay, so we can kind of see within each one how the money's allocated.
Well, what you're going to see, the breakout, I'm sorry, Council President Troutner, the breakout that you're going to see really is what the new requests are. When we have baseline, that's a little bit more difficult to see that. It's not necessarily in the proposed budget. Typically, it ends up being broken out in that adopted budget. But I'd be happy to get something together for you guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So this is going to go into what some of those proposed changes are. So when you're seeing some of the budget differences from department to department, in administration, we do have that equity manager position, which you'll see will increase the FTE count for administration by 1. The budget increases in 2021 by $243,000. Please know that that is not only to cover the manager position, but that's also $50,000 for the opportunity to hire in a consultant to put in a strategic plan together as it relates to racial and social justice within the city for 2022. And then the other part of that is supplies and services. So part of that funding rolls forward, not quite as much for that consultant side of the house in 2022, but still having that funding for that manager. There is the Economic and Community Development Opportunity Fund that the mayor spoke about during her budget message. And there is $300,000 that's allocated to that in both years of the biennium, which would be paid out of the general fund. And again, this is an opportunity fund that would be available for departments that match initiatives of economic development. And examples of times or having a fund like this would have been fantastic would be when we're having to design projects in the preparation for grants, just we saw with the Meet Me on Meeker segments. There's other things that the mayor did speak to in her budget message related to that fund as well. And then in human services, there is currently temporary limited term position. And what this budget would do is go ahead and extend that through the biennium. The purpose of that is as we begin to go live with Workday, the post go live work, there's still going to be post go live work that will need to be done. And so that is what that is there for. In addition, within our Parks and Recreation and Community Services, there's a $40,000 for the Greater Kent Historical Society Museum funding. Also, in 2022, Human Services Opportunity Funds, as well as truing up some of our parks operation staffing needs, both in the overtime and seasonal staffing funding. And then finally, you're going to see on the expenditure side of the house, we did increase our that new B&O outdoor square footage tax, and we want to be able to use that to fund our capital program. So there's $1.8 million that would be allocated out to the capital program. Again, you're going to see a reduction in transfers out by $3.1 million. And if you recall, when we were looking at the revenue, we talked about reporting directly into the general fund that 4% utility tax directly into the capital resource fund instead of recording it as a revenue in the general fund and then transferring out. It really help us remove some of that double counting, which seems to exist in governmental finance. So that is what that is there, as well as some IT and street adjustments. As you know, the general fund does contribute to the street fund, and that their expenses, as their expenses go up, oftentimes the need for additional funding from the general fund also goes up. So you'll see both in IT and the street fund some increased costs for 2022.
Madam President.
Yes, Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you, Madam President. There's a question for Paula, and maybe Derek might can answer this here. And part of our big expense really to get down the head count, right? I'm just curious, something we put in place, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 months ago, head count wise go. So when I get to see position when they open up, right? So I'm just curious, I know you guys look at new positions or replacing people as they leave. And I know they go through a process where you get to say yeah or nay. Have there been any people who had left and you looked at the head count and have not decided to replace anybody?
I think that I would probably have to defer to the HR director or to Derek on that one, as I would be able to speak specifically to my department, but beyond my department, I don't know.
I was thinking overall, and if you don't have an answer now, I could wait till later. I was just curious.
Sure, I'm happy to respond, Councilmember Boyce. We have, well, ever since the COVID-19 reductions, we put a process in place where if a department director wants to fill a vacant position, they have to fill out a form and justify filling that vacancy, make the case that there's a compelling reason to fill the position right now. There have been more than a few examples of where a director has chosen not even to put the form through and request to fill a position. So off the top of my head, I don't have the specific position names, but I can say that directors are very aware of the requirement to justify it, and for that reason have held some vacancies.
Okay, that answered my question. Thank you, sir.
All right.
Oh, hang on, Paula. One quick question. I believe Councilmember Corr has her hand up.
Thank you, Madam President. Paula, quick question. Because of that not filling position, what is our current, I don't know if you know the answer, what is our current FTE count? The reason I asked that is because I was looking at our adopted budget from last year, And number of positions we approved in that adopted budget was 721. But when we're looking on this budget presentation, total FTEs by department are up by, it says 733. So we must have approved some positions that I can't recall right now. But just out of curiosity, how many positions, what are we exactly down at this point? And how we are up by like 12 positions from what we adopted in 2019. I can't recall that, I'm sure. We have an answer for that, just kind of out of curiosity, looking at what exactly is the number right now and what we're presenting in the budget.
Okay, so Michelle, would you go back a couple of slides for me, please?
So that's 717, is that due to COVID or?
Yeah, it's due to COVID, and then also I don't know if we had any term limited positions reduced in there either. So
and then I know communications moved into administration, but that's still higher than
yeah,
what it should be.
communications moved into administration, and it's still higher than what it should
So
be.
yeah, because they moved from IT and police, right? The combination.
Yeah, so that would have been a net zero. They were just shifting.
Yeah, but when I looked into our previous adopted budget, the positions were actually 11.5 in administration.
Okay, so what ended up happening is we probably need to pull the mid-biennium budget adjustment that was done. There were some positions that were added at that time. I don't have that right in front of me. In addition, there were some positions that were approved by council in January before COVID hit. I
Yeah, I
believe
remember those.
some of those were term limited positions. I do apologize. I don't have the list right in front of me to answer that, but I'd be happy to get that information to provide you with the crosswalk.
That would be great. And the reason I ask is because I was looking at just overall budget. The most increase is in administration.
So,
All the departments.
Madam President, also, I want to look into this further. Within the last biennium, we also created the Sound Transit program within the administration department. So those are 2 term limited positions fully funded by Sound Transit. So depending on when those were added, that might explain the increase to which Councilmember Corr refers.
Thank you, Derek. And one more question. Sorry, can you remind me what the Youth Teen Fund is, please? I can't remember that.
So the Youth Teen Fund is a fund actually where we record our, we have utility taxes recorded into that fund. Then what ends up happening with that fund is we really end up transferring that money, the majority of that money from that Youth Teen Fund into the general fund. We use those monies to support some of our youth teen programs. And so I don't, so it's really just an opportunity for us to ensure that that utility tax is being used to support our youth specifically.
Okay, and the reason for reduction, is that due to reduction in utility taxes or just trying to balance the budget or the funds not being used? I'm just, because we'll have that conversation later. Thank you.
Well, for the youth teen, I'm sorry, I was just trying to figure out where you are looking at that, and I'm not exactly seeing it. But with the youth teen, it was not a reduction in support person. It was just the move of a body, although that person is still supporting that same role. It's just a shift in the funding.
Thank you, Paula. That's all for now.
Okay.
Thank you, Paula.
Any other questions before we continue on?
All right, I don't see any hands raised, so I think we can advance.
Michelle, can you get me back to where we were at? All right, so we just finished up with the expenditure side of the house. Any other questions on this is the major changes within the general fund. So these are the things that have happened on the various departments. Were there any questions on these?
Sure.
All right. And then let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So what is next? So on October 6th, we're going to have our next workshop. And during that workshop, we are going to talk about our other funds, some of the significant changes that are going on with them. Then we do have a special workshop on October 10th. This is going to be the opportunity for departments to provide presentations to the council. I believe that this is a process that's been used in the past where they come with, I'm going to call it a one-pager, although for some of our larger departments, it's hard to confine what it is that you do to a one-pager. So, but they will have an opportunity to come before you, answer questions that you might have, provide you with some information on their department. We will be having another meeting on October 20th, another workshop, and this will be a great time for us to continue to go over any questions that you've had or any requests that you've made for us related to this budget. Also on the 20th, we will have a public hearing on the budget and the CIP, the capital improvement plan, as well as our property tax levy. It is our greatest hope that on October 27th, we at the council workshop, which would be a special meeting, that we could make some final decisions and gather some final thoughts on the budget so that we could bring it forth through to the committee of the whole for recommendation on October 10th. And then on the 17th, we're hopeful to be able to adopt it before the holiday. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for you? It's really clear that there's a lot of information that we have put in front of you, and you really haven't had a lot of time to look at that, considering we weren't able to get it out the door to you, and that's just more due to our crunch timeline than anything else. We were feverishly working on making sure that we were able to get it to you today. But I'm certain you have questions, and I really encourage you to please send your questions my way. What we'll do is we'll collect everyone's questions, and the next time we get together, we'll have an opportunity to go over responses to that question to make sure that everyone is having an opportunity to hear and share and have information about the budget. Also, I know that some of you probably would prefer to have a hard copy of the budget, and once I know who would like to have a hard copy, I'll work with multimedia to see about getting those copies ready and let you know when those books are ready for pickup. Can I find out from the council members today how many would like them, or would all of you like a hard copy of that book?
Maybe raise your hand in the participant feature, and then I can. Well, I'm seeing a majority of the hands going up, so maybe if you can just provide a copy for all the council members, that would be great.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I'll just make sure that we have that ready to go. For those of you who I know for the council members, I do hope that one of the two emails that you received, I sent out to, if you weren't able to connect with the link, I did send out the book as well to you. So that is out there for you to use. But I also wanted to let everyone know that we did publish the mayor's proposed budget on the website. So if you go to www.kentwa.gov/city-hall/finance, you will be able to find that budget book.
Madam President,
Yes, go ahead, Councilmember Boyce.
I typically don't like paper, but with the budget, I mean, I prefer paper because I like to kind of go through it. So if possible for the mayor proposed budget as well as what Paula just went through, I mean, for me, it makes sense to have a copy to go through it versus looking at it electronically. So that would be my request for me.
Thank you.
All right, we will have those for you as well.
And I think we are going to be, with looking at the timeline and the meetings that we have and the opportunities to discuss the budget, this will give everyone a chance to make notes, kind of do your homework and put down any questions that you have as well with those hard copies. So Councilmember Larmer, do you have a question? Oh, Councilmember Thomas.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. I, excuse me, along the lines of what Councilmember Boyce was talking about, could you put the hard copy like in our mailbox and have it available?
I definitely will, and I will let you guys know once they're available.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, does anyone else have any questions or comments for Paula at this time? All right, I'm going to look to Derek. Did you have a closing comment on the budget portion?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Wanted to extend a huge thank you to Paula and her team who have been working very hard at a feverish pace today to get these materials ready for our council meeting. The budget document is posted on the website, as Paula mentioned. Also, I'm going to ask Paula to put the PowerPoint from tonight's meeting on the website as well, where council members and members of the public can peruse that information. Also, Councilmember Core had asked about youth and teen, and I couldn't pull up the number in time, but wanted to point out that in the past year, we were able to invest over 11 million into programs benefiting vulnerable populations. And we'll delve into this further, but the proposed budget invests an additional 16 plus million into programs for our most vulnerable. So sorry, I wasn't prepared to answer that question earlier, but wanted to circle back.
Great, thanks, Derek. All right, Paula, thank you again for a wonderful presentation. We will be talking to you again soon. And in the meantime, council members, this is your opportunity to look through that budget book and to take notes and get your questions back to Paula if you have them. Moving on in our special meeting, I'm going to welcome Marina Hanson and Adam Long to talk about House Bill 1590.
All right, I'll just wait for the slideshow to pop up. But thanks everyone for having me back again this week to chat a little bit more about House Bill 1590, which I introduced to you last week. I'm just going to do a quick refresh of the topic, and then I'm going to add a couple more details that we learned just over the last week. And then I will turn it over to Adam to walk you through the ordinance itself. So next slide. Once again, House Bill 1590 was approved by the legislature in 2020 and effectively allows King County to councilmanically impose a sales tax of up to 1/10 of 1% countywide. And then that authority to implement the sales tax is extended to cities if the county doesn't take action by September 30th. Just a reminder, a minimum of 60% of the funds collected must be used for those activities listed in the slide. So construction of affordable housing, behavioral health facilities, and then the funding and operation and maintenance costs of the housing and facilities providing those services on site or evaluation and treatment centers. So the facilities and programs that are funded through the levy must serve those below 60% AMI. And then those funds will also target specific populations. So that includes those with behavioral disabilities, senior citizens, persons with disabilities, DV survivors, homeless individuals or families, and also unaccompanied homeless youth or young adults. And then the remainder of those funds that are collected have to be used for operation, delivery, or again, the evaluation of mental and behavioral health treatment programs and services. This is just a reminder of the potential scenarios that we walked through last week. We do understand the county won't be able to impose the full tax rate by tomorrow. But again, if they do not impose the full tax rate, then any city can submit a proposition to voters or impose their new councilmanic authority to impose the whole or remainder of the sales and use tax rate. And if the county does impose the full tax rate, but it is after a city has imposed, which could be done after September 30th, then the county must provide a credit against its tax for the full amount imposed by a city. So since last week, we've learned some additional details about the county's plan. So they're calling it Health Through Housing. They are focusing on housing 2,000 chronically homeless residents by October of 2020. And we did kind of mention it last week, but they are being very upfront about wanting to take advantage of our current economic situation by focusing initially on acquiring those single room setting buildings like hotels and nursing homes. And they are acknowledging that this is a temporary window of opportunity due to the COVID economic downturn. So they want to focus on acquiring those in the beginning of this plan. And then they will immediately start to use those facilities for emergency and affordable housing. And then the long-term goal will be to convert those units to permanent supportive housing, while also continuing to begin developing additional affordable housing. Their initial plan also includes a mobile behavioral intervention program as an alternative to the use of law enforcement. I haven't been able to delve too deeply into that yet, but the goal is to connect clients to housing that was created and or operated with the Health Through Housing revenues. And then they also plan to eventually use some of the funds to build the capacity of community-based organizations. And again, not many details about what that looks like yet. And then of course, plan to line out the process for siting affordable housing and behavioral health facilities beginning in 2022. So that's after this initial focus on motels. And then according to the other information I have seen, they plan to use an equity and social justice impact review process and also consult with any cities that they plan to site a capital project in. They will prioritize those 2021 proceeds for projects within any city that submits a written statement of support. And then in accordance with the RCW, they will, of course, plan to spend at least 30% of funds collected in cities with over 60,000 residents in the community that generated those funds. And I actually have a cut sheet on this that was put out by the county that I'll go ahead and send out to you guys later this week. But next slide. Early estimates that I think we got from SCA indicate approximately 2.8 million would be generated in Kent if the city was to impose the tax locally before the county imposes it countywide. And that pretty much wraps up my portion tonight. You have some options, of course, that you can consider, and I will turn it over to Adam to talk through the ordinance now. I also mentioned on there that we're going to engage the SCIP member cities to discuss the potential pooling of funds. I didn't want to go too deeply into that because I'm just not aware of the legalities around that option yet.
Thanks, Marina. And I'm just trying to share my screen here. It looks like, Kim, can you? Yeah, thank you. All right, so I'm just going to go over a few important points for the ordinance. I'll start with the recitals and then get into the actual ordinance. But like Marina said, this new statute or amendment to the statute through HB 1590 lets the council impose this tax without sending it through a proposition to the voters. Important point here that I've just thrown in a quick sentence about is that if we act first on this, we retain the full amount of the tax revenue of that 1/10 of 1%. We get to pick the projects here, the locations of the facilities, our priorities, and the particular options we have for the populations we intend to serve through that list of folks that Marina talked about, persons with behavioral health disabilities, veterans, senior citizens, etc. So it's important to keep in mind that by acting first, we retain that authority. Looking at section F down here, this is assuming that King County hasn't imposed the additional sales tax by the time we act. If we do, if they do, they don't necessarily have to take the entire 1/10 of 1%. If they don't, then that still leaves room for us to enact an ordinance and tax only the remainder of that 1/10 of 1%. So depending on what the county does and how quickly we're able to act, if we want to impose this tax, we may need to revise a few sections of the ordinance based on that action.
Councilmember Lara, did you have a question about this piece of it?
I did actually. It was stated in Marina's presentation and then also in one of the recitals. So 60% has to be dedicated to these specific uses. What does the other 40%, is there a restriction on the other 40% of the revenue or?
Yes, the other 30% has to be used for, let me just pull it up here on my desk.
Is that the, it was a little
It's for
unclear.
the,
Is that the maintenance part?
Yeah, it's the operation, delivery, or evaluation of mental health and behavioral health treatment programs and services related to housing.
Okay, so it's basically 60% towards new capital, right, and 40% towards the operations.
So getting into the actual ordinance itself here, looking at section B here, this is under the assumption that the council would want to enact the maximum rate. Like I said, we don't have to enact the entire 1/10 of 1%. We could do less than that. There are options there, and depending on what the county does and when we take action, again, those rates may change.
Okay, thank you. I think my question's answered.
Looking at section D down here, this is just pointing to the statute, as there are some other abilities built into the statute regarding issuing bonds and pledging repayment of those bonds with the funds raised from the tax. Section 2 here, like the last time we dealt with affordable housing and supportive housing and the sales and use tax, we built in this language to the ordinance as well, kind of fast tracking it to the mayor to be able to use those funds and also pool them with SCIP through the interlocal that we already have in place, and to then execute any other agreements that are necessary to transfer those funds. And finally, the last important point is the effective date. Under state law, we are able to enact an ordinance and have it be in force 5 days after publication if it deals with the levying of a tax, which we would be doing here. And an important point about that is that that 5 days doesn't change, and ordinances imposing taxes isn't subject to the emergency procedures. So 5 days is the minimum, the quickest we can get this enacted in effect. And another important point it's not in the ordinance, but King County is controlled, their ordinances is controlled by state law as well and by their county ordinance. And so their ordinances typically go into effect 10 days after enactment, unless it's an emergency ordinance. So that will affect the timing about when King County's tax would go into effect versus ours. Just something to keep in mind when we're dealing with the timing of these tax impositions. And I believe that's the last major point, unless anybody has any questions.
All right. Any questions for Marina or Adam on this? I know we talked about it last week. There's a little bit of new information. Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you, Madam President. So if we do not enact and King County does, they will be getting up to 1% increase, correct?
1/10 of 1%.
1/10, up to 1/10 of 1%. And with that 1/10 of 1%, would they be able to use that anywhere in the county? Or
yes, the only restriction that they would have is the requirement to use 30% in the city of Kent, or generally in cities with a population greater than 60,000. So Kent would be included in that.
So we could end up with as little as 30% and have restrictions on what we would do with it?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, the county, if they're going to be putting facilities in the city of Kent, they do have to consult with the city. I imagine that would just likely be through our permitting process, but the statute doesn't really spell out what it means by consult with the city.
Thank you.
Do you mind if I chime in one more thing real quickly?
Yeah, go ahead. And then I'm going to turn to, I see Madam Mayor has her hand up.
Okay, I just wanted to, one of the pieces of information that I saw that the county put out was that they are going to specifically be targeting those 30% and under AMI. So it sounds like they plan to have a more narrow focus than that 60%. So that's just something to consider as well.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, do you have a question or comment?
Thank you, Council President. First, to Marina's point, that is my understanding as well, that their goal, the county's goal, is within the next 2 years to purchase up to 2,000 rooms that will serve as emergency overnight shelter and eventually be able to be converted into supportive permanent housing. So looking specifically at hotels with kitchenettes or that kind of thing, so they can do individual housing, and also nursing homes have been on or sort of up for consideration. I also want to speak a little bit to the use of the funding. This is a point that I received clarification on today, and Marina had it on her slide as well, that 60%, that can also go toward operation. So it can go towards there's some question around whether the ordinance or the House Bill 1590 says specifically construct, but the belief is that the writers of that also included the intent was to be able to purchase. So there's going to be some clarification needed there, but part of that 60% can go to operations. The 40% is more restrictive towards treatment type things. County Council did take this up tonight, and it was referred to Committee of the Whole as well as RPC for, I believe, October 6th is the next Committee of the Whole meeting. It's my understanding, and again, not wanting to speak for the King County Council, but it's my understanding that the intent is to leverage this opportunity. Council Member Boyce spoke to this a little bit last week, we're in a position of either the county takes it or the city takes it, but I don't believe that there's any intent for this to be not leveraged in King County. And I think probably Councilmember Larmer can, in her work with affordable housing, I'm seeing a nodding of her head. So I think the thing that needs to be stressed tonight, and part of why this was brought back to the agenda, is the council could potentially need to, if you chose to leverage the tax, to keep 100% of it in the city of Kent, knowing that it's going to be, our residents are going to be taxed either way. It could necessitate an emergency meeting. So this could be a matter of acting on within a very short time frame, 24-hour notice, depending on how quickly county council takes action. The executive has transmitted his plan for this. Like I said, it does go back to that purchasing of 2,000 units and bonding of the proceeds. So it could happen fairly quickly at the county council level. But we don't know their time frame yet, other than that it will be at their committee of the whole process on the 6th. So that's part of why wanted to bring it back again tonight to make sure that all of your questions regarding it were answered.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I have a quick question for you. What kind of conversations are you having with cities in the region as far as what are they doing, or are you getting any idea of what other cities are thinking, or if there's a possibility of working together? What are you hearing?
So I can tell you that there are conversations going on all across the region for a variety of different things. Smaller cities that are not guaranteed that 30% would like the option to have the funding that's being generated in their cities. Larger cities that are included in that are, considering the same thing that you all are weighing. It really comes down to controlling the projects and making sure that they're tailored to fit the needs of a specific community. So there are definitely ongoing conversations in the region with regards to this funding stream.
Councilmember Boyce, I see you got back in here. Good to see you again.
Yeah,
Councilmember Michaud, do you have a question or comment?
Thank you, Council President. Do we know if we were to leverage the full amount, how much we would get? And then how much is 30%?
I think it's about 2.7 million, Marina, correct me if I'm wrong. And I haven't done the math down to the 30% level.
Yeah, it's pretty close to 2.8 million, and I am not a mind math person, so someone else is going to have to jump in on that. I bet Kurt has already done it.
Well, while we're figuring out that, Council President, one other thing, there is also potentially an opportunity to pool this funding via SCIP. The East Side has a similar program, ARCH, and that would then create a larger pool for projects to happen, in a faster way, and again, more tailored to that sub-regional level as opposed to the county-wide perspective.
In order to take advantage of doing something like that, where we combine our money together, we still have to take that action as a city to be able to say where that money goes.
The council would have to take the action to enact the tax so that the 100% funding comes to the city as opposed to the county, because if the county enacts it, they're only required to spend 30% in the city, and honestly it could be more. We know that housing and land is less expensive in South County than it is on the East Side or in the North End. So in an effort to get to that 2,000 units, again, I haven't seen a plan from the county. They are talking about making sure that there's equitable distribution, but also talking about where the need is, and so a variety of things factor into that.
Madam President.
Councilmember Boyce, go ahead.
I got booted off, so I'm sorry. That's more question here. So, Madam Mayor, maybe you already answered the question. I don't know. So, for Renton and Federal Auburn, where are they at on this matter? Do you know?
I know that Renton started their conversation at their council meeting last night. I did have a brief conversation with Mayor Backus today. It's my understanding that cities are all sort of in the same place that we all are here, that there's potentially an opportunity to make this decision, so everybody's sort of in the beginning phases of that conversation. You know, as is the county council. They took it up tonight and referred it out to their committee of the whole for next week, and also referred it to RPC.
And just to make sure I understand, so if we adopt this ordinance, do we have 100% say so on how the funding will be spent versus if the county adopted, they pretty much can dictate what can happen in our community? And that's a safe way to say this here.
That is correct. I have, the county has told us that they are looking to work with cities. At a conversation with them, I was on a call with them today, and there has been a commitment to work with cities. What that looks like, what that process is, I couldn't tell you. I don't think it's been defined by the county council.
And to me, I guess at the end of the day, it sounds like something's going to happen, right? Whether we do it or the county do it. And to me, based on historical, you know, on how, in my opinion, on how we've been treated by Dow and team, in my opinion, it have not been fair. And I don't think they looked out for the welfare of the people that live in Kent. Then at the same time, you know, this is definitely not a time to be raising taxes. I'm sure Les probably feels strongly the same way. But, you know, if I have to choose between based on what happened in the past, having the county do something to me versus us controlling our own destination, my preference would be, hard for me to say this, but I want to control our own destiny. And at the end of the day, I don't thoroughly trust the county, and I can say that just me as a whole. I just don't trust what they could do to us. So that's the part that I'm up against versus controlling our destiny versus having someone do it to us. And we've seen that happen already before to Kent and some of the other South King County cities. So
well said.
I can tell you with 99% confidence, because again, not wanting to speak for the county council, I really do think it's a matter of whether they leverage the tax or you all choose to leverage the tax. I don't think it's a matter of it not happening. So I think that that's really the question of, do you want them to impose it and then make the determination on projects? And there's nothing saying that they can't still spend the portion that they're receiving in Kent. This just gives this council some additional control over that funding stream.
Thank you. All right, got some more hands raised. I'm going to start with Councilmember Larmer.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to reiterate what the mayor just voiced, is that, you know, in the conversations I'm hearing in housing at the regional level, I mean, there's really no doubt in my mind that this tax is coming, unfortunately. This is not the time to be taxing residents, but I think it's going to happen, and it just comes down to whether we want control of how that is used in our community, because I think it's an inevitability that this is going to happen.
Thank you. Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you, Madam President. Along with Council Member Boyce and what the mayor was saying about the county, you know, in my opinion, and I don't know a lot about, I know nothing about what they're going to be doing or the decisions, but I would think that they're doing this countywide so that they can also decide where the money goes countywide. And so if they were going to leave it with each city, I don't think they would be putting forth as much effort as they are to be able to get it for themselves. So that means that people in Kent would very likely be paying for housing in other places when it's needed here in Kent. I do not like sales tax. I think it's regressive. I think it affects some of the people who can least afford it and have no choice in what they're buying, but have to pay it anyway. But if they are going to have to pay it, I think that they should be paying it, and it should be spent in Kent. And so if I think King County is going to do this, you know, looking at what they've done during the pandemic, hearing from Catholic Community Services and some other sources that they have a big push on about buying the hotels. I think this is one of the engines that they're going to use to do that. So I think it would be forward thinking of us to make sure that we're looking out for people. You know, it's a hard time to be doing this any time, but especially now. So I think that we have to also look at where that money, if left to the county, would end up, possibly. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Madam President. I totally, word for word, agree with Councilmember Boyce. And I don't think I could have said it any better. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Councilmember Thomas. Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. Okay, so maybe I misheard this, but if we don't do this and King County does, then they have to spend 30% in Kent. Was that correct?
So I can jump in here. So they have to spend a minimum of 30% of what's collected in Kent. So it would be 30% of that 2.8 million would be the baseline that had to be spent here.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
But that don't mean they can spend more if they choose to also, right?
They could spend the entire amount in Kent. So yeah, that's the base. That 30% is required to be spent in each city that has a population over 60,000. So that's a requirement for all of the large cities: Auburn, Federal Way, Renton, Kent, Redmond, I think is in there, Bellevue. So that's the baseline. They could absolutely spend more, and that I think is the thought too, is being that land is cheaper in the South End, you get more bang for your buck with that goal. So and I just wanted to add in also quickly that there's an opportunity here if you all were to pass this to pool with SCIP. So we would look at spending that money sub-regionally, so stay in South County on projects and work within that existing framework that we have with SCIP.
Madam President.
Yes, please go ahead.
And this to the mayor and her team. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the communication around this is critical, right? So, you know, I mean, I think we all believe this is not a good time to raise taxes, but it's coming. And I think how the communication team put this information out is going to be key, you know, for us as elected official. And at the end of the day, we're trying to, lack of a better word, we're trying to protect our territory and have some say so what come here, what don't come here. Because if we don't, a good example could be the motel that they brought in here. So I will hope that our communication team will guide us and make sure we put this information out in a way to help our citizen understand why we're doing what we're doing.
Yep, message received for sure. That this is a decision of, it's a who, not a matter of whether. And it would be you all taking control of sort of, like you said, Council Member Boy, your own destiny, as opposed to leaving it in the hands of the county. But that's a decision that you guys are going to have to make to vote on this ordinance.
I guess I was saying if we go this route, I mean that's going to be
exactly part
of it. What I'm saying,
that has to be the communication to residents. I think you all have said it really clearly. This is not a good time to be leveraging a new tax. I don't know that anybody thinks that it is, but unfortunately, time is not a luxury I think will exist with this.
And for my sake, if the reporter listens to this here, at the end of the day, we are getting tired of the county doing to us. We want to be able to have our own control and our own destiny. I mean, that's what it's all about. So I said my piece.
Thank you, Councilmember Boyce. You've summed it up multiple times this evening. I feel like we're kind of being backed into a corner here, and this gives us a little bit of control. I also like some of the things that you said, Madam Mayor, as far as working with other cities in the region through SCIP and combining those efforts to do what's best for entire, South King County is a great option as well. One of the things that the mayor did say is that we may have to take action on this very quickly. So a lot of you have made the same comments this evening. We all see the same concerns. We've voiced them here. So I just want you to be prepared if we have to come together on very short notice that, you know, we'll be willing to make a decision that is right for the city of Kent and for our community. So I just want everyone to be prepared. Councilmember Fincher, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just, in case we are wrong and King County, which I can't imagine them doing, decides not to enact any tax, we would actually be able to rescind it or to not tax our people, wouldn't we?
I'll just jump in here real quick. Yeah, that's correct, Councilmember Fincher. But I suppose that could open the door back up to King County getting ahead of us again. I suppose that could be an interesting legal scenario, but you are correct that at any time we could rescind the tax.
Thank you.
Madam President,
Yes, Councilmember Boyce.
I guess once we get through, is it possible that Adam can send out the draft that he showed earlier so we can start taking a look at it, please?
Is that okay, Adam? Is that something you can do?
Sure, absolutely.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. All right, do we have any other questions or comments about this? Okay. Again, just keep in mind that this may be something, and I'm guessing probably in the near future, a conversation that we're going to be having again. So I appreciate what everyone had to say tonight about this, and we will see what happens. All right, looking at the agenda, it looks like we have nothing else this evening. So great workshop, lots of information covered this evening. Again, you have a little bit of homework to do. You have your budget proposals to take a look at, get your questions answered by Paula, and then Paula will also share those with us as well. And have a good evening, everyone. Stay safe and take care. We are done this evening.